chat. If you have a question, you can either interrupt Jesse, perfectly fine with me, or you can put it in the chat and then we can see if we can answer it too. Okay. So yeah, chat is enabled. Use that or just start talking and interrupt. That's fine. This is not that formal. But Jesse, take it away.
Okay, good. Well, I assume most folks know me, but my name is Jesse Ayers. I'm the Socioeconomic Modeling Program Manager here at MAG. My group is responsible for doing the long-range socioeconomic projections and our population estimates that we do every year. And so we're going to spend a little time today talking about the model and how it works. We did this workshop almost to the day 4 years ago and 2 days. And in the spirit of reuse and recycling, a lot of this presentation is the same as it was from 4 years ago. We have not changed the model very much. We had a pretty successful run last time around, so we didn't want to rock the boat, so to speak. So we didn't make a lot of changes. It did see a lot of changes over the last decade, but we feel like we really got it to a pretty stable point last time, so we're going to stick with what's working. So we've got this broken up into 3 different sections. I'll spend a very brief couple slides on the what and whys of azmag and what it is, why we're doing this. Spend a fair amount of time on the input and base year data that we put into the model, and numerous slides on the simulation sequence and description of each of the models. So what is azmag? Well, it's a big system full of tons of different types of data, many different types of models, and it can produce tons of different outputs. There's tools that help us deal with assessor data. It's a system that helps us bring together many different data sets that were not designed to work together and bring them into a base year database and then use that forecasting forward. So what is it really? Well, it's an open source framework for developing socioeconomic projections. We have tools that help us do data development and maintenance of our land use, general plans, various inventories, tools that help us do population and employment synthesis, data analysis tools for running, configuring, estimating the simulation models. azmag makes heavy use of the UrbanSim and the Urban Data Science Toolkit that they provide. UrbanSim is an open source framework for socioeconomic projections that's used worldwide and all across the country. So it's a pretty widely used thing that we've based our model off of. And all of the model is written in Python and hosted publicly on GitHub. If anybody is curious to dig into the details, we do host all the code out there so somebody can see exactly what we're doing if they are so interested. So why do we do this? Well, the number one reason is we're required to. The executive order there states that we have to do this 3 times a decade. Years ending in 2, 5, and 8, the state demographer's office provides us with county level control totals of population going out to, this time we're going out to 2060. And we are then charged with, allocating those county control totals down to the sub-county level. And I think the executive order gives us 9 months to do this, starting at the beginning of the year. We try to get it done in 6 months to get it on the regional council agenda for June, before their July break. That's what we target, and we've been successful in doing that the past several times. So that's the number one reason we do it. Number 2 reason is the travel demand model and air quality model requirements. They both depend on the socioeconomic inputs to function, and our models are improved by feedback from the travel model as well. So that's another reason. We get asked a lot of questions also that early models were not well equipped to answer. Maybe they just didn't have enough detail to do things like corridor studies and provide data to activity-based travel models. So that's why we are pursuing this type of simulation system. We also are interested in doing policy analysis. That's what UrbanSim is designed to do. What if we want to lay in a commuter rail or something along those lines? Theoretically, we can use the system to test such things and see what happens. So that's just the basics on the what's and whys of what AZ Smart is. We're going to spend a fair amount of time here on the input and base year data, because that's really, really important. This data model right here, where we start with parcels, buildings are attached to parcels, households are attached to buildings, persons are attached to households, and jobs are attached to buildings. This structure is very much fundamental to how the model works and what we're doing. So this is super important to understand, and it's really the basis for, and it's pretty intuitive, because it's how the real world works. You know, most of us live on a parcel in a building of some sort. You know, we have household and persons in our household. That's what we're targeting here. So something that's kind of easy to understand and also realistic. So tons and tons of different data sets go into the base year database. We spend probably 80% of our time working on the base year database, because it's most of our answer even for the future. You know, we're going out 40 years, 2020 to 2060, but you know, there's a couple hundred years in the base year database. So if we have that wrong, then you know what's going forward is also going to be that much more wrong. So we spend a ton of time on the base year database. There's a lot of data that we maintain here in RAD that is updated and reviewed annually, such as the existing land use, the developments, the general plan, the employer database. All of you folks in PopTech are familiar, I think, with these, as you know, we're constantly bugging you for updates and bugging you to review it and those types of things. So these are maintained on an ongoing basis, and all of these things feed right into the base year database. We also use a lot of other inventories like group quarters, schools. We have medical facilities and various other things that we try to supplement the database with. These are all reviewed annually and kept up to date on an ongoing basis. And so the base year database it's an observed database of the entire region. And our base year is 2020 this time. We're basing it in the census. We have a lot of data for 2021 and 2022, and even a little for 2023. But so we're going to be using that as well. We're not going to be forecasting 2021 and 2022, but there will be some forecasted elements to those, but we'll use real data for those as much as we can, because we do have quite a bit. But the base year is technically 2020. Our population control totals, we're making sure to control the base year database to the 2020 population estimates by city. So all that matches up right at the beginning. And our employment control totals are based on the first two, or I'm sorry, no, I actually have this wrong. It's based on not the 2020 and Q1 and Q2 QCW. It's actually based on the full year, the 2020 annual QCW. My apologies for that mistake there. So that's where the 2020 control totals for employment come from. For land, we primarily use assessor parcels. We fill them in with our existing land use data set because the assessor doesn't have a parcel for every single piece of land. So we make sure we cover everywhere. You know, for instance, they don't do the greatest job of public, public data, public parcels and public buildings, and also the reservations. So we fill those in and make those improvements where we need to. The built space is primarily, again, from the assessor improvements file, but we also supplement that with data that we collect from you, because like I just mentioned, the assessor doesn't do a great job of tracking public buildings, so we collect that from you folks, and we also use other public data to supplement this too. We do have 20 some odd different types of built space that are aggregated from the assessor model types. So I think there was over 100 different types that the assessor tracks, but we've aggregated this down into about 20 that are more useful to us. And they're typical things like single family residential, multifamily residential, retail, industrial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what they look like. And I have another wrong date in here. Residential completions are current up until I think middle of last year at this point, if not sooner. So there's another little mistake in this. In terms of the building occupants, we have the households, of course, that I mentioned a minute ago, and we synthesize those from the ACS and PUMS data. I'll have a couple slides on that, I believe. Employment comes primarily from our employer database. We have to make some assumptions about square foot per job by building type. So for instance, in a retail building, maybe there's 250 square feet per employee on average, whereas maybe in a warehouse, there's 2,000 square feet on average. We use that to tell when a building is full of employees. And that's one of the assumptions that we make. We track employment by the NAICS 2-digit industrial sectors. That works well for our travel model. And we do track work at home employment. That has obviously been changing quite a bit in the past few years. One of the things that we're work with our travel modelers on this to get a handle on the work at home employment. And the way we've sort of divided the work over work at home employment between us and the travel modelers is that in our model, we are simulating where the jobs are. So we track where the jobs are. We're not in our model, we're not simulating where people are traveling to. And that side of it is handled in the travel model. So they're actually the ones that are doing the simulation more of who's working at home and who's not. We simulate where the jobs are, and some of them are in homes. So that's sort of our definition of work at home employment. Okay, so in order to create a table of household and population, we have to synthesize this because the census doesn't provide detailed data like we need. So we do this technique called population synthesis, and we synthesize population down to what we call pseudo block groups. The reason is that blocks and block groups don't aggregate up into cities boundaries, and we want to control the city boundaries, the population. So we make up our own block groups and synthesize to those so that everything matches up into the city well. And then we have to locate the households into dwelling units themselves from the block group. The employment synthesis is heavily based on the MAG employer database. That's already a point and parcel level database. The problem with it is that it doesn't account for all of the employment in the region. The control total exceeds the total level of employment in the employer database for certain sectors, especially. And some the employer database has more than enough, and we actually have to reduce it. So we have to scale our employment database to match the county level control totals that we get from QCEW. So that's why our simulated employment is actually different than our employer database, but it's more realistic to the totals, if you will. Special populations are also handled too. We model seasonal populations. There's a special category in the census ACS where they categorize dwelling units, and there's a category in there where they're held for seasonal or other use. So we use that to allocate our seasonal households to. Non-site based employment, this is the type of employment like Amazon drivers or landscapers, people that are driving around all day. They're not really going to a specific place every single day for their job. So we allocate these proportionally to just to where the population is and where the jobs are, because they're out there maintaining those buildings and doing that stuff. And construction employment is also modeled as well, and we shuffle construction employment around every simulation year in the model, and we allocate it to where things are actually developing in the model. So population synthesis, I have a little kind of example here as to how we do this. So up on the upper right, the red line, this might represent a block group, and let's say there's 100 households in it. And so from the census ACS, they just give us information about this total block group, but we need information about each of these little parcels is what we want. So the ACS will just tell us, hey, well, there's 100 households here, and there's 30 that have household size of 1, 40 that have a household size of 2, and 30 that have 3+ household size. So we know that from the census ACS about this block group. It'll also tell us households by income, for instance. We know there's 60 high and 40 low, but that's all the ACS is going to give us. They're not going to give us anything else about that. And we need detailed records to allocate to each one of these parcels about these people. So we generate a frequency matrix. That's what this is down here in the lower right. using a methodology from a consultant called RSG. What it does is it computes effectively how many, it takes the households by household size and the households by income and gives us a matrix of where they both fit. So now we have an estimate, we have approximately 23.6 household size 1 low income households in this block group. And now that we know this, or we have estimated this using the methodology, we can go use another data set from the census called the PUMS, which is the public use microdata sample. This provides us with the detailed records that we want, but it doesn't give us one for every single parcel. It only gives us a sample. So what we do is we sample from these PUMS records. We'll go in and we'll select roughly 24 randomly select 24 household size 1 low income households and put them in this block group from the PUMS. And then once we have that, we have all these records that are attached to this block group, but they're still not attached to these parcels. So there's one more step. The PUMS record gives us, it's the detailed record that you answer when you get the ACS survey. So it has everything in it, like how big is your house? How much money do you make? How many rooms do you have in your house? What kind of plumbing do you have? All sorts of stuff. So we use those answers that are given in the record and do our best to match it up to an appropriate parcel there in that block group, because we have information about each one of those homes from the assessor. So we'll just do like a matching algorithm that probabilistically matches these different household records into these homes. And what you end up with in the end is a very detailed database that's statistically consistent with what the census said there was in that block group, but you have all the details that you need to do the modeling. So that a little complicated, but this is a common procedure. Travel modelers do this constantly, and we're kind of unique. We do this once and then simulate going forward. In travel model, they do this for every year they do, actually. So it's a very common technique, but a little complicated. So this is what you end up with after synthesis. And this is completely made up data here. I just completely made this up. You have your parcels, you have your buildings, you have your households, and your persons. And so we have an individual record for every single person that has stuff like their age, whether or not they're the head of household, marriage, student status, all sorts of things. It's, the actual table is larger than this considerably. And then of course, here's an example. Here's an example where these 3 people make up a household. This is the household, and then we have the households table, and it has information about the household. How many children are there? What's the age of the household head? The household income? How many persons there are, workers? Things of that nature. Maybe how many vehicles they have. That type of thing. And of course, these people reside in this building, and this buildings table. This was generated from the assessor's data and other things that I mentioned before. And this has information about the building. How many residential units are in it? How square foot of the unit, things of that nature. And then of course it's attached to the parcel, and the parcel has all sorts of information on the parcel in terms of where it is, how big is it, what's it close to, what does it consist of, things like that. So that's what our database on the residential side, what it ends up looking like in detail. So there's the employment side as well, and we kind of have to do the same thing on the employment side, but it's just a different technique. Or I already mentioned that the MAG employer database is parcel matched already, point level. So that does a lot of that work for us. And I already mentioned too that the control total for the county is more than what we have in the employer database. So we have to scale the employment, and we do that by NAICS code. And excuse me, some of them have to be scaled pretty substantially. But healthcare is one of them, for instance. So one conflict that we have at the end of this, even after we scale them, is we still have to match the employer database is attached to a parcel, but not a building on that parcel. So we have to make that leap. And there's all kinds of strange issues that happen. The point, falls on a parcel, and the parcel could have, just one building, and that'd be great because it's pretty clear that that's the building that the employees go in. But there's a bunch of other complicating things where there's multiple employer points, there's multiple buildings, there's no buildings. So we have techniques to deal with each of these situations as they arise, because they all arise. It's just these things just weren't meant to work together. They weren't built that way, and we're making them fit. So here is the non-residential example with jobs. It's a little different in that we don't have the middle, what would be the business, where the jobs belong to a business and business goes in a building. That's not a leap that we've made yet. One of the big reasons we haven't gone down that path yet is that we don't know how to simulate firmography, if you will, like the growing and shrinking of firms, moving of firms, and things like that. That's not something that we know a lot about at this point, so we haven't tried to tackle that. So for that reason, jobs are attached right to the building, and there's no intermediate business level. I explained the building square foot per job thing earlier, and this allows us to tell when a building is full of employees. That way we can calculate, things like vacancy rate and estimate when we need to build new real estate. So that's the basic idea with non-residential. And again, back to this data structure, just as a review, this is what we're targeting for the base year database. We want to have this nice structure that's all clean and it matches all the control totals that we need to match. You can probably imagine why we spend so much time working on this. It's constantly refined right up until the very, very end that we have to run the simulations. So that's most of what I have about the base year data and how we structure that and how we manipulate it to get into that point. Going forward, we're going to talk about how we go into the future in the simulation using our models. So what is a model anyway? It's a mathematical abstraction that allows us to make assumptions or make predictions about real world systems based on observed data. So we have a lot of different types of models in our model set that you'll see, but probably the biggest takeaway on this slide is at the bottom, the deterministic versus probabilistic models. Deterministic will produce the same thing every single time you run it. Like you give it some inputs, you click go, and it gives you a result, and you can do that over and over and over, and it'll always give you the same output as long as you give it the same inputs. We make use of a deterministic model. Our real estate development process is a deterministic model. It's always going to give us the same thing if we give it the same inputs. Probabilistic or stochastic models, these have a random component. So when you run these again and again and again, they're likely to produce something slightly different. This is because we're modeling human behavior, so that, they're not always the optimal decision the model thinks it should. Humans don't always make the optimal decision that the model thinks they should make. So we use a random component, and models like our employment and household location choice models are stochastic models. So this slide is just to show that we're not making all this up. We do stand on the shoulders of academics out there who have done a lot of work in this range. So we are making use of a lot of academic concepts and applying them to do this. So we aren't just making this up. There is a lot of literature out there on this topic. So here's just a few of the probably the big citations that are in the field and some of the bigger names. So this is the overall look at what the simulation sequence looks like. We have a set of demographic and employment change models. These simulates the demographic change in population and change in employment. So this is where we are getting, new people moving into the region, new jobs being created in the region, or people moving out, or jobs moving out, or being laid off or whatever. After that, we have a set of real estate development models that predicts the price and location, timing, and types of real estate development based on the past two models, which give us effectively our demand for new real estate. So here's where we start to develop real estate. Now that we have enough built for everybody to be located, we locate our households and our jobs into those newly developed buildings, or they can actually locate into existing vacant space as well, either way. So that's the overall look. We're going to spend a little bit of time in each one of these boxes in the next few slides so we can get some more detail on how these work. So these are called our household and employment transition models. They basically look at a control total they look at what we have in the model. So for instance, if it's the year 2025 and it's time to run this the demographic change model, it'll say, okay, we have, say, 5 million people in the region, but the control total calls for 5.1 million. So what it'll do is it'll go and sample 100,000 new population and set their location to -1. So they're effectively kind of homeless, temporarily homeless until real estate is developed for them and we locate them. So and as well, you can add or remove just as well, because sometimes there's change in employment that goes down. Maybe agricultural jobs are going to be fewer in the future, so it'll actually randomly remove jobs instead of add them if that's what it calls for. So either way, it'll just make the totals in the jobs and population tables match the control total for the year is really what these are doing. And it does this. This is just an example of how this could be set up. So this is a control totals table example. So you can do control totals by sex, by age, if you wanted to do that type of thing. So this is an example of where, for male ages between 0 and 13, this is the population control total that's in the table. That's what we want to match. This is what we have in the simulation. So it'll go and find 1,241 people of this category and add them to the table. Is how this works. So that's what these models are doing. They're pretty straightforward. The real estate development models that come next, though, are a little bit more challenging. This is easily the most challenging part of what we're doing, is the real estate development process. We make heavy use of the developments project or the developments database that Alex maintains. That's one of the biggest inputs into it. If we don't know about a development, then we revert to the general plan. And so those are the two big things that influence what's going forward in real estate development. So there are some times where we have, like say out in the far west valley, there's really large parcels that aren't covered maybe by a development or anything, that these are developable in the future and it's possible they could develop. So we tend to divide these areas up. We use to make them, you're not going to develop 50 square miles at once, for instance. So we use the PLSS sections to split up large parcels, and large parcels also get split up by other boundaries that we put into the model, like traffic analysis zones. All the census boundaries are in there, zip codes, things like that. Sometimes parcels get split up by those various things. Of course, we're only considering developable parcels in our development model. We are automatically excluding anything that's, forest land or anything of that nature. We have to estimate the demand for residential and non-residential space. So we do that using a vacancy rate. Vacancy rate varies, of course. Right now it's fairly low for residential, but we considered like around 5% to be sort of a structural vacancy rate that we want to always have. So when the vacancy rate falls below 5%, that's when there's triggered to build new units. And so, of course, using all the information that we have in the model can compute that on the fly and then determine how many units that we need to build, or how many square feet we need to build of various different types. For residential, we have an assumption about the share of units going to single versus multifamily. That is based on the past 4 or 5 years of development. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, what that divide is at the moment, but there is an assumption in there for that. Non-residential, so demand is in terms of job spaces. I described this a little bit earlier, but building square footage divided by square foot per job. Again, we utilize a target vacancy rate to compute the number of new job spaces to build by the various types. So that's all what's happening in this demand calculation here. Choose projects to build. So this is where it kind of starts to get a little complicated. Some projects are already in the process of developing. So clearly those keep going, and they will just continue. We also have these various tiers of development. So like I just described tier 1, the scheduled developments. These are ones that we know have a start and end years, or these are the ones that are already developing and they're not done yet. So these are the ones that are definitely going to get developed. And sometimes tier 1 projects are enough to satisfy demand for that year, and it won't go to tier 2. But tier 2, oh, I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting this a little wrong. Scheduled developments are tier 1. Tier 2 are the active developments that are currently developing, and then the non-active. So these are kind of prioritized in this order. And we assign scores or say weights to projects based on their type and status. So, you know, a project might get a higher score if something within, you know, say a mile of it is developing as well. So there are different things like that. There's a lot of different factors that go into the scores. And that's something that we experiment with quite a bit when we're running the simulation to produce what you folks expect to see when we go out and do the review process with you. So that's where we do a lot of art in there, not a lot less science in that part of the model. And then after all that is done, we estimate real estate prices. And the main reason we're doing this, we're not necessarily trying to nail down what the price of real estate is going to be in 2045, but we want to use these prices to influence location decisions. So these prices will end up being independent variables in the other models. For the household location choice model and the employment location choice model will utilize these prices, and they'll change over time throughout the simulation. So it'll influence those behaviors. I put together a real simple example. This is the real estate price model is a hedonic pricing model, just a regression. So this is just kind of a contrived example where a price is equal to the square foot of the home times the lot square foot and whether or not it's within a quarter mile of a landfill. And these betas are estimated off of real data. So this is the example of where it go. The beta for is it within a quarter mile of a landfill is negative because that's a disamenity, whereas home square footage and lot square footage are amenities, so they have positive betas. So you do this math, you go through there, and the price of this house turns out to be $130,000. This again is just a contrived example, but it goes through and does this for the entire region and updates it all so that it can be used. Information can be used in further models, namely these. So the household location choice and employment location choice models take those homeless households, if you will, that are kind of floating in the households table and predicts a specific building record for them. So different variable, we stratify these models. So the household location choice model, we have models by 3 income classes. So over time, we actually have an income model as well, and income will change. So households will actually shift between these over the simulation. But clearly, the factors that influence the highest level of income are different from those that affect the lowest level of income in terms of where they're buying homes or making their location decisions. So that's why we do that. Employment is stratified into the NAICS codes, basically. Industrial type sectors have different factors that influence where they want to be as opposed to retail and office. So that's why we stratify them this way. Some of the variables that go into influencing where households and employers locate, we make heavy use of accessibility variables here. So here's some example of that. We might say how much retail employment is within 20 minutes of this location during the peak time. How much population is there within 15 minutes of this location? Those types of things are used to influence location decisions for households and employers. And we experiment a lot with these. And these are also updated using the travel model. So the travel model provides us with what are called skims that are basically travel times. And so we can estimate these types of things using information from the travel model. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that here in a little bit. We also use a lot of proximity variables. Just, hey, how close is the nearest bus stop, park and ride, this sort of thing. These tend to be pretty significant often. Back in these accessibility variables, we actually have difficulty getting the transit related variables to be statistically significant in the model. We have a lot better luck with things like this, nearest bus stop, light rail stop, things like that. For whatever reason, seem to be more statistically significant than the accessibility variables. But maybe that'll be different this year. We haven't tried yet this year. So other variables that we do, we do interaction variables. So for the household location choice model, not only is the characteristics of the household important on where they're going to locate, but also what the potential units are that they're looking at. Those things matter. So lots of different things, density, income variables, lots of different things go into these. Here's an example of how a location choice model works. I mentioned earlier that these are stochastic models. So you can easily get different choices happening every time you run these. So first thing the household location choice model does is find all those household records without a location. Then it finds all the vacant housing units. And so then now we have a matching problem of some sort. There's tons of vacant housing units. And so it's not a good assumption. When we go looking to buy a house, we don't look at 3,000 housing units. So we sample a reasonably sized choice set for each household to look at. So they're not choosing between thousands, they're choosing between 10 or something like that. So that keeps the problem more easier to solve. Based on the equations and all those variables that I was just talking about in the previous slide, we calculate the utility and the probability based on the household and housing unit characteristics, and then use random sampling to determine the choice. So here's an example at the bottom where we have this household. It has 5 choices, A, B, C, D, and E. The utility's been calculated for these, and then the probability, and these are the rough equations that are used to do that. And then over here, we've ordered the house choices by their probability of being selected. So house B is the highest probability of being selected, house E is the lowest. We accumulate the probability, draw a random number, and where it falls is what makes the choice. So in this case, it didn't choose what the model, or what the model thought was the optimal choice to make. It chose the next one down because of where the random number fell. And again, the reason we do this is because we're modeling human behavior. Humans don't always make the optimal choice. So that's kind of why we do that. And this is what happens every single year. So that whole sequence I just described happens every single year. And then every once in a while, we'll go out, we'll stop, and we'll send data to the travel model. They'll run the travel model. The travel modelers will bring in the skims back in and then restart ours and keep going. So that's how we get updates from the travel model. The travel model takes like 5 or 6 days to run. Ours takes like an hour and a half. So we can't do this every year. We start with an initial set of skims, of course, that they've provided us. But we probably do this 3 or 4 times out to 2060. And we do it in years where the travel modelers tell us that there's major network changes. So, if there's going to be a light rail extension opening, or like, when the South Mountain Freeway opened, for instance, that would have been a triggering event to, okay, stop the socioec model, let's go out, update the travel times now that something big has happened, and bring those changes back into the socioec model. And so that's how that works. I have a little sort of animated example of how that all works as well, to kind of review it all. So imagine that this is the county or the whole region, and we have occupied and unoccupied, occupied and vacant residential, and occupied and vacant non-residential, these buildings, and these little squares are parcels. And so here we go with the demographic and employment transition models. They're sampling and, bringing new jobs and new households into the region. And these people are unlocated at the moment. They represent demand for new real estate, though. So here come the real estate development and pricing models. And notice down there at the bottom, we're getting new vacant stuff being built based on the demand for real estate that was provided by the newly arriving jobs and households. Now the household location choice models come along and use those equations and estimated equations to locate these households. And now they're in there, and same thing happens on the employment side. They get located, and that's it. Before I take any questions, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the team. You hear me talk a lot, but Honey, Scott, and Kurt, these are the guys that are really doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. You've probably interacted with them at some point or seen them at PopTac. Can't give them enough credit for what they do. I tend to be a little bit more of a talking head, but really appreciate their hard work, and I'm sure they are hard at work right now working on this. Scott Wilkin, of course, he helps us interact with you folks, and of course, our fearless leader, Anubov. More than happy to take questions or open up for discussion or anything like that. I think I see a couple in the chat here. Let's see. Differential privacy in the Census 2020 data. That's a good question. I don't think so, because really the only thing that we're using from the 2020 census is the totals. And so to the extent that differential privacy affected the totals, that would be the only effect, because everything else we're using is coming from the ACS and the PUMs. So it would really just be totals, probably at to the extent that the block group level totals are affected by differential privacy, then yeah, then we'll have some effect, but I think it's fairly minimal. And I think that's the only question I see in the chat. Happy to take any live questions from folks.
Hey, Jesse, this is Jim.
Hi, Jim.
You talked about using control totals. I think the example you used was sex by age.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's at what level?
Oh, out the county.
Okay. I don't remember if you talked to us previously using what we have, or did you generate those control totals yourselves, or do you use the ones that's built into the model that we don't necessarily publish, but we do have the detailed data in the back end?
Right, yeah. That example I showed, we don't actually do that. We don't actually use the population controls by age. And I think the only thing we're doing is by sex and county. I think that's all we're doing. So it's really a more complicated example than what we're using in reality.
Okay, I see. Yeah. But if you ever need to use those control totals, we have them. You can see if they're useful or not. But I just wanted to make sure that's available.
Very good.
Thank you.
We have other questions? Or did Jesse?
Jesse, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Tracy from ADOT. Since a lot of the employment that comes into MAG comes in from outside of MAG, I mean, more than any other place in the state, how does that impact how the models run?
Can you clarify that a little bit, Tracy?
Well, for example, we know that people from all around MAG are pulled into the area for the jobs, even though they may technically live outside of MAG.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. So, yeah, so I think that's really, I think, more of a question for the travel modelers, because we only give them data for the 2-county region and a little bit of Yavapai and Gila. So they're the ones that are really modeling what, if somebody's coming in to the MAG region from, say, someplace in Gila County, they have their external zones for that in their model. But yeah, that's nothing that we model on the SocioX side.
Okay, so you're not explicitly taking into account the fact that some part of your employment is actually from people that live outside the area.
Right. That's not something that we're modeling, no. And
Okay,
not on our side.
A job is-
that was my question, because I wasn't clear to myself, exactly if you were doing anything with that or not. Okay,
Very good.
Yeah. If we have a job in the database, it's a job,
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're modeling where the jobs are,
Right.
not necessarily where the people are coming from to work them, not where they're being worked, I suppose. So, like, for instance, I'm at home today, but my job is located in downtown Phoenix. Our model would have my job in downtown Phoenix, and the travel modelers would have me home today. That's kind of how we divide and conquer the work at home thing.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
What other questions do we have? Anything else not clear? Or something you were wondering about?
This conversation doesn't have to end here. Clearly, if you come up with a question or whatever, just drop me an email or give me a call or whatever, and happy to clarify anything that didn't make sense or if I went over something too quickly.
And this presentation will be available on our website too.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to do some cleaning up on this because I noticed a couple of mistakes going through it, but yeah, we'll get that up.
Jesse, I have a quick question about the map that's showing on the screen right now, the little Arizona map.
Sure.
In the red area, I thought it might represent population density, but I see where the I-17 and I-40 meet. That's where Flagstaff is. I don't see much there, but there's a lot of stuff to the east. What is this red in this map?
Yeah, I think this is an old map that it was called the Red Dots map, and it's from like more than a decade ago. My predecessor did it, and using the previous model, and it was just done to show what statewide growth might look like. I don't know what year that's supposed to refer to or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, honestly, but I think it derives from our old red dot maps.
It just looks.
Yeah, I was just curious. It looks like
Yeah.
there's not much where I don't know, maybe that's not I-17 and I-40. It looks like, that little area. I don't see much in there.
It does look like Flagstaff is kind of missing there.
Yeah, and because there was a big area to the east that maybe that's Winslow. Winslow is going to become much bigger than Flagstaff. Is that
Right.
what it is?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There are no other questions. We can go ahead and finish the workshop. Jesse, you want to talk real quickly about the next couple steps in?
Yeah, sure. We have already met with most of the cities. I think we've done 21 or 22 different meetings in our draft 0 meeting, where we've spent a lot of time going over the developments. All that stuff has been put into the model. We're running simulations now. We're expecting, within the next month to have a first draft that we're going to come out and share with you guys. We'll take your feedback on that draft and go back and do a second draft. And assuming that there's, no problems with the second draft, that'll become the final draft that we'll bring to PopTac in May. And then management and regional in June. So that's kind of the rough schedule. You'll be hearing from us within the next month for the first review.
And we're thinking we'd like to try to come out and visit you to review these. And if it doesn't happen, we'll do it virtually like we did the draft 0, but one way or another, we want to get your hands on these and make sure everything makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will be in touch.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for participating. Thank you for Christian for coming in person.
Yeah.
We love all of you, but Christian a little bit more today than everybody else. And we will talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.